Hi everyone, welcome back to Dr. Han's Pharmacy Classroom Pro. Now this one is the third topic in the Performance Enhancing Drugs and Supplements series. In this video, we will explore the regulation of doping in sport. Now this unfortunately is a very boring topic, so let's run through that and stay awake. So let's get started. So some of the objectives for this lecture is really understand some of the brief history of anti-doping movements, describe some of the structure regarding national and international organizations, and summarizes the international standards of operation for anti-doping organizations, which is the WADA World Anti-Doping Code, and listed the anti-doping rule violations outlined in the WADA's definitions of doping. So I believe this lecture would be very helpful if you participate in international sports competition events. So we've looked at the long doping history, right, since ancient times. So why do we need to regulate drug use in sport? Now, if you remember a little bit of our previous lectures, and you would have known that a lot of these events lead to tragedies, and the number one goal here is for these regulation here is to protect the well-being of athletes by preventing the use of PEDs. These substances not only pose serious health risk but also compromise the fundamental principles of fair play and sportsmanship. Now, although achieving a completely level playing field may be challenging due to varying resources and access to training, anti-doping measures aim to provide a certain degree of equity among athletes. So how do we get to where we are? And really, there are stepwise process. Sports federations rigorously test athletes for substances on their own ban list. Although these lists can differ from one federation to another, athletes who test positive for prohibited substances face penalties which can range from suspensions to disqualifications. And to maintain consistencies in anti-doping effort across international competitions, the WADA has developed a unified code that establishes guidelines for anti-doping practices in global sporting events. Now, this code ensures a standardized approach to testing, sanctions, and overall fairness in competition on an international level. Now, so the development of the World Anti-Doping Code was a series of events that highlighted the urgent need for standardized anti-doping measures. Now, way back in 1928, the International Associations of Athletes Federation, the IAF, became the first sports organization to ban doping, even though, as we discussed about that at the time, that they didn't have any means to test. Right? They don't have the technology. But a significant turning point occurred in 1966 with the tragic death of a cyclist due to doping-related competitions. So the Dublin inquiry followed the scandal involving a Canadian sprinter, Ben Johnson, who tested positive for anabolic steroid at 1988, also served a hallmark for the development of the World Anti-Doping Code. Now, this incident has prompted a worldwide ban of performance-enhancing drugs in all sports. Now, consequently, the World Anti-Doping Agency was established in 1999. So that is the key time, and aiming to coordinate and enforce anti-doping efforts on a global scale through the creations of this anti-doping code. Drug testing remains a cornerstone or major part of the anti-doping movement, as it allows us to detect the presence of prohibited substances in athletes. In the early stages, in the early days, drug testing primarily focused on identifying stimulants, though these tests were not particularly sensitive or specific, due to limited technologies at the time. And initially, urine drug tests could only reveal stimulant use. A significant breakthrough came in the mid-1970s with the detections of anabolic steroids, and in 1990s brought the introduction of the athlete biological passport concept, and this addresses blood doping. And the year 2000 marked another milestone with the ability to detect erythropoietin or EPO usage. Now, if you remember the history lessons that we went through at the beginning, the East Germany, the German Democratic Republic systematic doping practices really was a troubling chapter in sports history, and a lot of the adolescents or women were doped without their knowledge. However, really unfortunate that little actions was taken to adequately address the humanistic issues stemming from this widespread doping. Now, most notably, the IOC chose not to, strip medals or records achieved by athletes who were known to have been doped as part of these systems. Unlike nowadays, things will go back to, the medal will be stripped. And in 1998, a significant doping scandal unfolded during the Tour de France. Now, this event underscored the urgent need for a unified and comprehensive approach to counteract doping in sport. And in response, again, all these events lead to the establishment of WADA in 1999. And I believe by now you would have remembered WADA was established in 1999. And along with the establishment of WADA, there's also the accompanying code, right? The World Anti-Doping Code, or WADC, which is a comprehensive code that lays out the international standards and a list of prohibited substances and methods essential for maintaining the integrity of sports competition. Now, it's important to note that the WADC is a non-governmental document holding no legal binding power over governments. Instead, it forms the cornerstone of collaboration between various stakeholders in the sporting world, including the athletes, sporting organizations, anti-doping agencies, and government bodies. One of the major milestones of the anti-doping movement was the Copenhagen Declaration, established in 2003. It holds significance as the creation of the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, or abbreviated the UNESCO. Now, its key objective of the Copenhagen Declaration is to encourage governments to acknowledge and adhere to the principles outlined in the WADC. Now, by doing so, governments plays a vital role in supporting the integrity of sports competitions and upholding the values of clean and fair play. So this graph showed a modern anti-doping structures. So it is very interconnected between WADA, UNESCO, the governments of each countries. And when we look at this graph, it really started from the bottom. So when you have athletes and supporting personnel, depending on which level they play, okay, if complete in a national level, and some countries even have the regional levels, and both reported to the international sporting organizations or major event organizations, and that reported to WADA, and WADA work with the UNESCO and the government, so they're all intercalated together in a loop. So we've been talking about this new code, the World Anti-Doping Code. So what is in there? Now, it encompasses several critical components to ensure the integrity of sports and uphold fair competition. They consist of a prohibited substance list, international standard for therapeutic use exemptions, international standard for testing, international standard for protections of privacy and personal information, and international standards for laboratories. Now first, let's look at the WADC, the prohibited list. Now it serves as a clear guide, illustrating or basically indicating what substances and methods are considered acceptable both in and out of competition. Now the list is dynamic, meaning it's always changing and subject to evolutions, as an expert committee engages annually with all stakeholders of WADA to deliberate modifications. Now the list development takes into account specific thresholds for certain substances, and when assessing the inclusions of a substance, several factors comes into play. These includes its potential to enhance athletes' performance, its potential adverse impact on health, and whether its usage goes against the core value of fair play and sportsmanship. This list is a crucial tool in fighting against doping and safeguarding clean sports. And in terms of the therapeutic use exemptions, or TUE, it basically provide a pivotal or very important role in distinguishing whether a drug is being employed for legitimate therapeutic purpose by the athletes or not, right? Now, to qualify for a TUE, athletes are required to furnish a comprehensive medical evidence that substantiate or indicating their need for the prohibited substances. And expert TUE committees comprise of sports medicine physicians and specialists who evaluate each case basically very, very carefully. And these committees evaluate these applications against three fundamental criteria. First, it is assessed whether the athlete's health would be significantly compromised without the prohibited substances. And second, the therapeutic use of the substance is examined to determine if it would yield a substantial enhancement in performance. And lastly, the committees basically assess if there exists no viable therapeutic alternative to the prohibited substance. Now, the TUE process ensures that the athletes with genuine medical requirements receive necessary treatment while upholding the principles. Now, we need laboratories, so we have accredited WADA laboratories to do these testings with formal analysis of the collected samples, making sure the accuracy and reliability. The majority of these laboratories are situated in Europe currently, and reflecting the concentration of testing facilities in that region. However, WADA is actively discouraging the establishment of additional laboratories in Europe and is instead exploring opportunities for expansion of testing sites in South America and Africa currently. Now, so say an athlete provided a sample and tested positive, meaning with a note of adverse analytical finding in the first sample. Let's call it A sample. Now, these athletes would have the right to request a analyze of an alternative sample, a B sample. Now, if the B sample analyze agree with the result of the A sample with the presence of an adverse analytical findings, then subsequently the anti-doping organizations is obligated to offer a fair hearing process to making sure whether an anti-doping rule violation has occurred. Now, should the hearing substances of this, have violations, then these athletes have the opportunity to engage in an appeal process. Now, this comprehensive, sequential steps ensure transparency, fairness, and accountability in the anti-doping process, basically really safeguarding and protecting the right of the athletes. Now, actually, to have that violations, there are several different scenarios. Now, first of all, this includes the presence, of the prohibited substances or its metabolites or markers in athletes' samples. as well as any incidents of athletes' use or attempted use of a prohibited substance or method. Additionally, refusing or failing to provide a sample after notification without a compelling justification constitutes also to a violation. And violation regarding athletes' availability for out-of-competition testings, including in accurately providing whereabouts, where they are, or missing tests are also considered a violations. The athletes are required to report their location for 1 hour daily throughout their competitive career, known as whereabouts, and failing inaccurate whereabouts information on 3 separate occasions within a 12-month period is deemed a significant violation. So I know this whereabout things, it probably comes to a surprise for all of us that are not athletes or not athletes competing at the international level. So the anti-doping rule violation relates to whereabouts involve the requirement for athletes to provide information about their location and availability for testing, and athletes are obligated to file their whereabouts information with organizations like the USADA on a quarterly basis. Now, this information is submitted through an online system or via email. Now, other than using or attempted to use or actually tested positive for substances, there are also other ways that which you can violate the anti-doping rule, now including tampering with or attempting to tamper with any aspects of the doping control procedures, as well as the possession or having the prohibited substances or methods. Now, in addition, trafficking or attempting to traffic in any prohibited substances or method is also considered a serious violation. Another significant violation involves the administration or attempted administration or assistance in the administration of prohibited substance or methods to athletes. So that would be some of those coaches, right? Now, so that we've seen like a lot of cases where this anti-doping rule violations can happen. And in 2015, updates were introduced in this violation rules to enhance the reach of the regulations to encompass athlete support personnel. So it wasn't enough. Let's expand. Now, these updates focus on the intentional complicity encompassing actions such as aiding, conspiring, covering up to commit a event to violations, and the revisions also address the associations of athletes, particularly in the professional or sports-related capacity, with supporting personnel who were either serving a period of ineligibility or had been convicted in a criminal process preceding the conduct of these doping-related events. So basically, not just the athletes, but also their trainers and other supporting personnel, not only just the trainer. So after everything is confirmed, what about sanctions? The punishments of the doping. Now we've seen that for someone that openly admitted versus someone keep denying that, the amount of ban from competitions, the durations do vary significantly. So it is really very case by case, we can tell that. And when a violation occurs during competition, it really results, first is the disqualifications and forfeitures of the point, medals, prizes earned in that event. And disqualification is typically followed by a period of ineligibility during which the athlete is barred from participating in further competitions. The public disclosures of violations is particularly impactful from both personal and professional perspectives. Athletes are publicly identified only after the conclusions of a formal hearing and any appeal process. So when it's being, talked about in the public, it is really the final, call. It's really final. And in case where multiple team members were committing violations, teams may also face sanctions reflecting the collective responsibilities in maintaining clean sports and discouraging doping events across those team environments. The period of ineligibility really means that the time where the athletes are barred or prohibited from participating in the related events. The length of the period varies based on the nature of the violations, how the history of the violations, were there repeated offense, or was it there's other relevant factors such as knowing using the PED, or is it if they admit to it voluntary or not. And as we just talked about, it can range from years of ineligibility to months of eligibilities, so they do vary pretty big. So can there be an appeal process? Right? If the ethics thing is unfair, if that's not right, is there a way to appeal the WADA or other organizations? And yes, and we have the Court of Arbitrations for Sport, or CAS, which is an independent entity separated from any sports organization. The CAS has the authority to establish temporary courts in the Olympic host cities to address specific cases during the Games, and notable examples including Russian athletes appealing bans from their respective sporting federations for the 2016 Olympics, and CAS ruling on the eligibility for athletes with this hyperandrogenism, higher than natural androgen levels, to compete in the professional women's athletics. So just a final recap for this lecture video. We've talked about the anti-doping code. Okay, what constitutes in those code? What are the list of prohibited list? The setting up the different therapeutic uses. And what constitutes a violation? So we've seen different violations and how it's being handled case by case. All right, so that wraps up the rules and regulations of doping in sport. And next time we will look at specific agents, okay, specific categories in those performance enhancing drugs. So it's a little bit more science than these boring topics. Okay, thank you very much for watching, and I'll talk to you again next time. Take good care. Bye.